All right, here we go. Well, good evening, everybody, and we're going to look tonight at Mark, the 13th chapter. And this is going to be kind of a situation where we're going to look at a little bit of what happened and what went on. And I want to share a little bit with why I wanted to pick this. And the election is all over. And how many of you know that there's been various prophets that prophesied all sorts of things about the election? Okay, and a lot of those people had quite a following. And so as we look into what has been going on with the election and with people prophesying about it, some people actually used it to their advantage to try to bolster their ministry. How many of you also realize that what took place, a lot of people were predicting that before it actually happened? And it wasn't due to any type of supernatural means or anything like that. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, because of the way things were going down, it would be easy to say you were prophesying that Donald Trump was going to win. You all catching what I'm saying by that? Mm-hmm. So what we're looking at here in Mark 13 is a situation where Jesus is actually prophesying. And it starts off with this: and he came out of the temple, on one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what a wonderful stones and wonderful buildings." And he said to him, "Do you see these great stones? There will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." So he's predicting that this temple, which was the third temple that was built, is going to be totally destroyed. And the first temple, when it was built, they used no chisels or anything like that. They basically stacked the stones on top of one another. And it says in verse 3, "And he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple. Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?'" Now, part of what's going on here is that this temple has been built for decades, and it's still being built as they're talking about the temple. And there is a situation here where what you see in Zechariah 14:4, "On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall be moved northward and the other southward." And this is something that was prophesied, and what we're seeing here is Jesus is actually on the Mount of Olives talking about the situation. And as they looked at the temple, it was the largest building, the tallest building. And it would be easily able to be picked out from the Mount of Olives as you look down into Jerusalem. And so this is a situation that is going on that is bringing about a questioning of what's happening. Because they know the prophecy is also talking about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord, like judgment, is coming. Now, William Barclay tells us a couple things about this whole situation. Instead of leveling off the summit of the mountain, a kind of vast platform was formed by raising up walls of massive masonry and enclosing the whole area. On these walls, a platform was laid, strengthened by piers which distributed the weight of the superstructure. Josephus tells us that some of these stones were over 40 feet long, by 12 feet high, by 18 feet wide. It would be some of these vast stones that moved the Galilean disciples to such wonder and amazement. And it was actually considered one of the modern wonders of the world. And even today, when you go down to the Wailing Wall, as it's put, you can see here in the picture the far people in the back are the men, and the ones closest to the picture are the women. And they go there to worship. They read the Torah, they read the scriptures there. People put little pieces of paper with their prayers in it and stick it into the wall. So this is a remnant of what has taken place in their history. Again, it's another thing of space, time, and history. So Jesus starts talking about this in verse 5, and he began to say to them, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name. I am he, and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of war, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famine. These are but the beginning of the birth pangs. Be on your guard." And I want to stress that tonight, because what he's talking about is the whole situation here of false teaching and false prophets. And in our day, there's a lot of false teaching going on. And so some false teachers use the election as the opportunity to increase their ministry, to get some self-glory. But he says, "Be on guard, for they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. And then when they bring you to trial and deliver you over, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever you're given in that hour, for it is not for you to speak, but the Holy Spirit." How about that? It's not what you can conjure up, it's what the Holy Spirit is going to give you. "And brother will deliver brother to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved." Isn't that a wonderful message of hope? Isn't that describing the world today as much as it did back in, let's say, the New Testament times of the book of Acts? But we're going to 14 when he says, "But you will see the abomination of desolation standing where you ought not to be." Let the reader understand. Now, there had been various situations with the temple where foreign entities came in, and literally one slaughtered a pig, another put up statues. In other words, they tried to defame the holiness of the temple. He says, "When you see that, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on housetops not go down, nor enter his house to take anything. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants those days. Pray that it may not happen in winter." Why? Because in winter what takes place, instead of having snow like what we have, they have tremendous flooding taking place. Have we not seen some of that recently? "For in those days there'll be such tribulation as not from the beginning of the creation that God created until now, and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ. Look, there he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all these things." But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out his angels and gather the elect from the four winds and from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Now, let me just share this with you here, because this sounds pretty much like the end, does it not? I mean, a lot of people look at this passage and says, this is what's going to happen at the end of the world. This is actually what happened when the Romans came in. In 70 AD, Titus came up to Jerusalem and literally surrounded the city. And what you had was people were eating people, cannibalism, because the siege went on for about like 6 months. And when the siege was going on and the soldiers were coming in, the church took heed to what Jesus said here and evacuated Jerusalem. They left, where the Jews were still bound and determined to defend the temple. Now you have two aspects here that are very important. One is the temple, which is a man-made building, and it is the center point of all Judaism. It is the point where all the sacrifices took place. It is the point where the religion of the Jews was lifted up high in all of its glory. But something happened between when Jesus talked about this and 70 AD. Number one, he died and resurrected. And so the temple wall of cloth that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place, 6 foot thick, was torn in half, opening up now the access of God and man through Christ. There were no longer a need for sacrifices. There was no longer a need for all of the priests and all of the ceremony that went through. The living Christ, resurrected, was the choice that one had to make in this dilemma. Either one could stay with what was going on in their old traditions, or they could move forward into what Christ had for them. Now, here's the situation also in a nutshell. They literally tore apart the temple, stone upon stone. They literally set the entire city on fire. And you can look at the illustration here. This is a severed woman's hand. And what you see in this is what excavators have been doing. They came across this in a house, and the temple and everything were made out of limestone. And the heat was so intense that it turned everything to powder. That's that blackened thing that you see around that hand. It is nothing more than the dust left over. And so Jerusalem was literally laid in a dust. And in that, what we see here is that he's warning us about these false prophets. Look at what Craig Keener is saying here. False prophets and false messiahs had gained Jewish following all through this period, and usually challenged the authority of Rome, generally leading to death of their followers. Josephus reports that some prophets continued claiming that God would deliver Jerusalem up to from their slaughter by the Romans at the fall of Jerusalem. After the temple's demise, hope for Messiah's coming were presumably even more intense. In other words, they're seeing the Romans there. They're seeing everything actually happening as Christ told them. But there were even false prophets during the time of Jesus. And so it was difficult to try to discern who was saying what. But we have what? We have the word of truth right now. And so instead of moving towards situations where you're seeing people that are making proclamations and saying, I am the king, I am the Messiah, be wide awake and see what's happening. He says, in those days after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. We see some of this in the book of Revelation. But then he says something very interesting here in 28. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts out its leaves, you know the summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Okay, and let me get to the page here. But concerning that day, verse 32, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be awake, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or in midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. Now there's something interesting about this. How many of you remember listening or reading about the fig tree, where Christ comes up and he's looking for figs and he doesn't find any, and he curses the fig tree? Well, there's something interesting about the fig tree. And if you look at the illustration, what you're seeing is a fig tree with little figs on it, right? And these trees can be huge. They're not necessarily small trees. But why is he having a problem with this? Well, before the tree bears figs, what it does is it bears a different type of fruit that is not a fig, and it is a sign that the figs are coming. Now, this little fruit is edible. And so what you're looking for is this tree going to produce fruit or not? So if there are no these buds that are on the tree that are edible, then the tree will not produce fruit. And because of that, what will take place is the owner of the vineyard will come in, or the orchard will come in and kill the tree. The axe has been laid at the root. Remember hearing that from John? And so they remove that tree and put in a tree that produces fruit. Now that's kind of interesting with what he's getting at, because how he is ending this is he is saying, look, here's the situation. Are you going to bear fruit or not? Or are you going to be distracted or not? So the idea is to keep your mind on Christ, to keep your mind on the Lord, to keep your mind on his commandments and be obedient to them. This is the situation of what he's getting at, because we do not know when Jesus is coming back. But he is coming. And it is not preached a lot nowadays, but he is coming and he is returning. Are you ready? That's the question.